Perhaps in fact, I know I referred to it because this is what happened prior to the storm that we talked about 2 weeks ago. And so we're going to talk about this morning. I played around with two titles of this. First one is Moved with Compassion, and then I came up with another one called Meanwhile in Houston. You'll understand what that means in just a little bit. Mark chapter 6, beginning in verse 32. So they went away by themselves into a boat to a solitary place, but many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. By this time it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him and said, "This is a remote place, and it's already very late. Send the people away so that they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat." But he answered, "You give them something to eat." They said to him, "That would take more than a half year's wages. Are we to go and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat?" "How many loaves do you have?" he asked. "Go and see." And when they found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Then Jesus directed them to have all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and fifties, taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks, and he broke the loaves. Then he gave them to the disciples to distribute to the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all. They all ate and were satisfied, and all the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish. The number of the men who had eaten was 5,000. And let's pray. Father, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight. We pray, oh God, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. There's no doubt that if you've been watching, it's kind of hard to watch a lot of it, what's been happening in Houston. And I've been watching it on not only on TV, but also on social media for people actually doing video on the ground, driving down the streets, showing all of the people who've been able to get back at least to their homes, but now everything's piled up along the side. And it's interesting to hear the criticisms and the affirmations and all the things that happen at a time like this. But some of the dumb things that people say are pretty incredible when you get right down to it. We call it, I call it being tone deaf. You've probably heard that term before. It's mean they're so tone deaf to everything else that's going on around them that they can't see, they can't see it because they're so focused on what they want. So it's very interesting because, like, my wife was talking a couple of illustrations this week. One of the things, she was talking to someone who was in another part of the United States. She often deals with people in other countries. So somebody in another country, you could kind of understand this. But as she was talking to them, Pam said, "Look, I'm trying to help some of our folks in Houston." And the woman said, "Why? The storm's over." And then went on to say something to the effect that I'm paraphrasing. "I mean, I guess if it's not in our backyard, we don't care." I liken it to back when my daughter over a year ago had her broken leg, and it was an open compound fracture. It was more than a broken leg. It was emergency surgery. It was within an hour she may have lost her leg. It was more serious than, say, the person that came to her and said, "What happened?" Because that's what they all do. "What happened to your leg?" Even now with the scar. "What happened?" And she goes, and then she tells them, "I had a double compound fracture." And usually there's a few people that immediately when you tell them what happened to you, what do? They start talking, "What happened?" "Well, I had a broken toe. I know how you feel." You ever had that happen? Somebody says to you, "How you doing?" And you tell them, and then they immediately tell you what's going on in their lives. Because we become so tone deaf to what's going on in our own lives, we become tone deaf to what's going on out there because we're so focused on what's going on with us. Now, I think about what happens in a crisis and why is it you see all these people that suddenly want to help. And I think there's a certain element of people, most people want to help. I think there's a couple of just sick people that just kind of relish. They used to have professional mourners that would go to funerals, where they would just go and they just want to kind of get involved because it's fulfilling some kind of psychological need. But I think mostly when you think about crises and why do they bring us together, it's interesting. I'm going to give you the three things. So for those of you that aren't on Facebook, I talked about this yesterday, but I'm going to give them to you very, very quickly because I think this is what happens to us. And why do we pull together? Because you guys realize just about 2 weeks ago, people were pulling down statues and taking down flags and arguing about their rights and why I have the right to have this flag and why you shouldn't have this flag and why this statue means what happened, and on it went. There were people protesting and burning and all of this kind of stuff. And suddenly now, the same people are picking up folks in a boat who differ politically than them, who differ religiously than them. And nobody, by the way, is even checking them and saying, hey, where are you from? Oh, no, I'm not going to save you. Hey, what? Oh, no, you're the wrong color. Ooh, you're Latino? No. Because there's something about a crisis that sort of brings us together, and it's the way we should be looking at things all the time. So what is it? I'll give you three things real quick. Number one, I think during a crisis we finally realize just there are really, truly vulnerable people. And until you've been without water and electric and all of those kinds of things that we just take for granted, that suddenly you can't get it, desperation sets in. I mean, you can't sit there and look at that. The one that got me, folks, was the nursing home, where here are these people sitting in, these elderly people, they can't walk in the wheelchairs, and the water is up to here. They got all of them out, but you realize that's true vulnerability. And so when we see that, if we're compassionate at all, and we're not tone deaf at all, we're like, man, somebody, we got to do something. Because that's truly a vulnerable situation. I think also, number two, that we kind of come together in a crisis because we not only see the vulnerability, but we really do see that there are true victims. I'm not talking about people that play the role of victim. How many of you know people that play a role of a victim? Like everything that happens, it's like, it's the end of the world. It's like what we used to call crying wolf. But there truly are people who have been victimized. They didn't ask for the storm. They didn't do anything to have the storm there. Now there's people that are victims of waiting until the water comes down. And so not only do you have that vulnerability, but now they're out of money, out of food, maybe out of a job, out of a home. They're truly true victims. And so we want to go in because most people will try to sort of go towards the victim when it happens. You ever notice that? That even somebody that's playing the role of victim, sometimes you look and you go, man, what's the matter? What does it matter with those people? We know that those are only playing the role of victim, but everybody kind of comes around them because we like to support somebody who is a victim. But there are those who have truly been victimized, and we see that happening now. There's a third thing, and I already made reference to this. I think we come together in crisis because suddenly we realize what we really value. It's like 9/11. Man, nobody cared about whether you were Republican or Democrat or Independent or anything like that. Everybody came together. It didn't last long, and I'm waiting now. By the way, every president has been criticized. Bush was criticized for how he handled Katrina, and every one of them gets criticized because there are people that are going, "You're not getting to me. You're not serving me fast enough." And often, those are the people that haven't even had any major losses. Sometimes they're sitting back on Twitter and Facebook, and they're going, "They should have done this, they should have done that." Meanwhile, from behind their keyboard in their mommy or daddy's basement, they've never been in a leadership position in their lives. Well, not in Florida. They can't be in their mommy and daddy's basement, but you get my point. They've never had any kind of leadership role, never had to handle any kind of a crisis, but buddy, they know what to do when it comes. They know how to tell you what to do. So there's a lot of critics. But those same people can get tone deaf. And here's the problem. Problem happens when we get tone deaf as Jesus' disciples. It happens so often that we get so caught up in our little worlds and what's happening just here in our little circle that we forget that there really truly are people, not just because of the storm, but people outside these walls that really are vulnerable, that really are victims, and that really do have value to Jesus. And there's probably not a better story in the scriptures to show how Jesus handled this situation and what we can do at a moment like this. And so let me give you a little bit of the background. You've heard the story of the feeding of the 5,000, and after this is, of course, Jesus handling things in the storm. And so they had broken away after some ministry and all of that to come together and to kind of rest. Now, you ever have that where you're just so worn out, you're like, I don't want to be around people? Those of us that work with people sometimes go, I don't want to be around people just for a short time. Because listen, if you actually work with people and you're in an emotionally draining situation where people are always around you and you're having to answer questions and all that, and you're having to solve problems all the time, it can be draining. And so Jesus is always solving problems, the human side of him. So they try to get away, and let's pick up the story again. So they went away by themselves, verse 32, in a boat to a solitary place. But many who saw them recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. So here they're trying to go and be alone. They're trying to go and just kind of relax. Jesus with his disciples, opportunity to teach them a little bit, opportunity to be around them, kind of sort of rest a little bit and recoup, and everything's going to be fine. And all of a sudden, all of these people who have needs start to realize where Jesus and the disciples are going. And so they get there ahead of them, and they're kind of like, they get across, it's like, we're here, Jesus. Now we're talking about 5,000 men plus women and children. That's a pretty big crowd. When Jesus landed, he saw the large crowd, and notice he didn't, verse 34, Jesus didn't see him and went, oh my gosh, I can't believe they followed us. I cannot believe that we are not going to get one here. I can't believe they showed up here. Now I can't even get out the back door away from them. I can't sneak out. They already saw me. Not happening. That's not what he said. Notice what it says. They flow ahead, and in the midst of all this, when Jesus landed and saw the large crowd, he had compassion. And literally, the way the Greek reads, he was moved with compassion. The word compassion in the Greek, actually, King James used to translate it bowels. It's kind of gross, isn't it? It's like, what? But it was talking about your viscera, like from the deepest place of your heart and soul, you're moved. Like at a place where you can feel it to the bone. Where you look at them and you go, man, we got to do something. And so it says Jesus was moved with compassion because what? Watch this. They were like sheep without a shepherd. They were just like, what are we supposed to do? In other words, it was chaotic and it was a crisis time. It was chaos. They didn't know where to go. They didn't know what to do. They were going around in circles. And if you've ever been the victim of a crisis situation, that's exactly what happens. I remember when we went down to after Andrew in 91, and we were down right at ground zero. And I think Vince was there. In fact, Vince took your old van down there. We went down there in Vince's van, and we actually took peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. But I remember the people coming out, and their houses, just half of their houses gone. In these neighborhoods that we were in, and debris everywhere. And we're driving through there, and I'm looking at this, and I'm thinking these people would walk out, and they're just like they're just dumbfounded, like they can't think straight. You've lost a loved one before? You've had where you're like for some reason I can't get my thoughts together. You've been there. And so Jesus sees these people, and he says they are like sheep without a shepherd. Like they have nobody to guide them. And then it says, now here, and I'm not going to go over to the other version in Matthew, but you can read it later. But he says here, so he began to teach them many things. And the other gospel in Matthew records that Jesus both healed them and taught them. So he's spending time. We're talking about personal one-on-one ministry. We're not talking about a Benny Hinn healing line, where he's like, okay, He's talking to these people individually, one-on-one. One of the things that people want to see from the presidents of the United States at a time like this is that there is this sort of compassion. And then when they don't handle it just right, they criticize him. They did it to Obama, they've done it to Trump, they did it to Bush. Everybody, depending on what their particular view is, and until you've been in that, you have no idea what you're going to do. But Jesus is taking time one-on-one with these people. So, now you know what happens with a crowd. Been there a while. It's late in the day. Now, I'm going to take a little literary license here, because let me tell you what I think is happening. I think the reason why Jesus told the disciples they were going to go rest is because they were tired. They had been involved in ministry. They were worn out. They may have even been, whining a little bit to Jesus, because you know how the disciples were. It was the disciples that were often, Jesus, when you get to your kingdom, can I want to sit on the left hand, and can my brother sit on the right hand, and we're going to sit there. They were always worried about their little part of what was going on. Like, Jesus, what are you going to do with me? What's going to happen with me? And Jesus would constantly have to take them and say, we got to focus over here. Yeah, but what about this, Jesus? What about what I want? What about my needs? It was constant self-focus. And so he's constantly moving them back out again. And so they're kind of tired, and you've been there. You've been tired. You're worn out. You've been around a lot of people, and it's late at the end of the day. And you know what you're trying to do? You're trying to get them out of the house before they stay longer and have a meal. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, if I can get up and get them out of here before 5 o'clock, I won't have to feed them. People sometimes are planning like parties. We got to do light refreshments. So if we do it after 1:30, we don't have to feed them lunch. But if we get it done before 5, we won't have to feed them dinner, and we'll get them out of there. Perfect case in point. You go to funerals now. Used to be people would come back to the folks' houses, and they'd be there all day, which is not always healthy. And people would come over and they would cook and do all that kind of stuff. Now you can get the funeral home. Why? Because the people don't come to your house and stay all day. They go home. So they'd rather pay for it to be there. So sometimes we just don't want it anymore. So I bet the disciples were wiped out. So they get to this place late in the day, and the disciples come to him. And they said, hey, Jesus, listen. This is a remote place. It's kind of far away. In other words, there's nothing around here. There's nothing to eat. There's nothing that we can really do about it. And, Jesus, it's kind of late, and we're kind of tired, and this has been a long day, and, it's a lot of people here. So since it's already late, Jesus, send them away so that they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages, and they can buy themselves something to eat. Don't you love that? You can see it coming. Hey, Jesus, listen, it's kind of late. We're all kind of tired. We've been at this all day. Quite frankly, these people got here ahead of us, and they weren't supposed to be here. And now it's so late, and we're tired, and we're hungry. So why don't you just, before this becomes a problem, and you have to have crowd control because these people are hungry, how about if you just send them away, and they can buy their own food? In other words, let them take care of themselves. We have got our own problems. We're tired, and we're hungry, and we don't want to do this right now. Jesus says, verse 37, you give them something to eat. What? With what? You want us to give them something to eat? Wait, we can't go cater this. Anthony's isn't here. We can't go to McDonald's and run to the drive-thru. There's nothing here. Jesus, so they said to him, and by the way, if you want us to go do it, we could do it, but it's going to take more than half a year's wages. Could you imagine that? To feed all of these people, we're going to go try to get bread and stuff. It's going to take over a half a year. Jesus, we don't. So here's the disciples. If you read the other accounts, they're like, we don't have enough money. We don't have enough time. In other words, Jesus, we can't do this because we don't have enough. See, what happens sometimes to people is that we start to look at what we don't have and how it's impacting me. And so they immediately move into this mode. We're like, Jesus, we don't have enough food. We don't have enough food. We don't have enough money. We don't have enough people. We don't have enough of anything. We can't do this. This is going to impact. We can't afford this. It's not going to happen. So Jesus then says to them, well, how many loaves do you have? He asked. He said, go and see. Now what Mark doesn't record, but Matthew does, is a little boy. Because they're looking around for something. There's probably a little boy that was on his way home to take food to his family. Maybe he had been sent to the market, whatever, and he gets caught up in sort of the crowd. And he's kind of hanging around, and maybe he was close enough to sort of hear this discussion that was going on. He may have been up front, so he was up to the front of the crowd where he could see and not have to look over everybody. Maybe his parents weren't with him. We don't know. We're not told the story. But somewhere along the line, he relinquishes his 5 loaves and his 2 fish. He takes the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and he says to the disciples, here, you can have them. And that's where Mark picks up the story. He goes, well, we've got five loaves and 2 fish right here, but hey, what are we going to do with that? 5 loaves. Jesus, there's 5,000 guys here. Plus the women and the children. We can't do this, so let's just all go home. Then Jesus had to direct them. I love this. To have all the people sit down. Now watch this, in groups on the green grass. I love Mark's version of this because Matthew doesn't say he has them sit down in groups. And Jesus has them sit down in groups of hundreds and 50s. Why do you think that is? Ease of distribution. He's going to be able to put them down in groups. Easy to distribute the food. Nobody's going to, once because he knows he's going to do a miracle. So I got news for you. They start to see that these loaves are suddenly producing and these fish, there's going to be a crowd control issue. And there's 12 disciples who they can't find their way out of a paper bag with a flashlight at this point. You know? And so Jesus says, I want all of us to sit down. And then he says, he takes the 5 loaves and the 2 fish. So everybody's sitting down. Nobody's gonna rush the buffet now. Can't rush the buffet. And it says he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and he looked up to heaven and he gave thanks and he broke the loaves. Then he gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all. They all ate and were satisfied. Now, I'd love to know exactly how this happened. And I would have loved to have seen the look on the disciples' face, because I don't know whether they had baskets there for some reason. People had baskets that they must donate. So I'm just curious, how exactly did they do this? Did Jesus throw it in the baskets and then it became a bottomless basket? It's like Olive Garden where they keep giving you breadsticks. They just keep coming and coming and keep coming, keep coming. More fish. Well, you want more food? Here, just going around. And around, and around, and around. And it said, did you see this? It says that they all ate and were what? Satisfied. And the disciples picked up, some of you were here before, I mentioned this. How many? 12. 1 for each. Who was like, we're looking at ourselves, we can't do this, we don't have the money, we don't have any of this. And Jesus says, I'll tell you what, how about if you take a basket with you? A doggy basket. We're going to, instead of a dog, this is a disciple basket. It's going home with you. And then it says the number who had eaten was 5,000. Wow. It's incredible. What an incredible story. What an incredible picture of the church today. Because it's interesting, I get all these clergy coaching things, and so I get some funny memes and get all of these different articles on how to know if your church is alive, how to know if your church is going to die. And depending on what you read, from which author, 1 minute the church is dying and the next minute the church is alive. It's all people's perspectives. But one thing that they say is going to happen to a church is if a sure sign that the church is gone is when all it does is focuses on what's going on in these 4 walls. What goes on here? In here. And so that was the problem with the disciples. It's been a problem. This is not new with us. It's not new in 2017. It's been a problem for years. Why? Because the first thing that we are tuned into, I think it was Zig Ziglar that said, we're all tuned in to radio station WIIFM, which stands for What's in It for Me. We do get there. And we all do it. I do it, you do it, we all do it. It's because of our sin nature. It's because of the fact that we all have our stuff. And so we start to look at what's going on here. That's what the disciples did, man. They were like, Jesus, we're tired, we're hungry, we got too much stuff going on, there's too many things, no, you know what? Just send them away. We don't have time to do this. And Jesus is like, no, feed them. And they're like, we can't. And he said, watch. Because what one little boy was willing to do was to give what he had for Jesus to use it the way that he wanted. And that's really the secret to all of this. That's why I said, meanwhile in Houston, my car's broken down. Meanwhile in Houston, somebody's car washed away. You can fill in the blank, I don't know. You've probably heard all kinds of stories of people saying different things. And my new thing is, meanwhile in Houston. And hopefully next week it's not meanwhile in Miami. We don't know. Because there for the grace of God could go us. And so God, I think, is calling us to do what we can with what we've got. And to take what we've got and to give it any way that we can for Him to use it as He sees fit. See, that's when we become outer focused and not inner focused. I'll give you the other scenario of this. It's kind of like, a telescope and a microscope do somewhat the same thing, except the telescope looks far away, the microscope looks at what's right here. Jesus looked through the telescope. Jesus was a guy that was always had before him his one purpose. And the one purpose was, I have to go to the cross. I'm going to die. There's all this stuff. I'm here to help the blind to see. I'm here to set the prisoners free. I'm here to preach the acceptable year of the Lord. I'm here to do these three things. This is my purpose, but I know what my purpose is, and I am setting my face like a flint to get to that purpose. And whatever the critics say, whatever this one says, whatever that one says, I'm staying focused, and I'm going to keep in front of I'm going to follow and go after the people in front of me. How many times was it the disciples and the Pharisees that criticized Jesus for the people that He was reaching out to? It happened all the time. The woman in Samaria, He wasn't supposed to be talking to her. The disciples are like, Jesus, what are you doing? Why are you talking to her? She's a Samaritan. She's a woman. You're not even supposed to be talking to this woman. Remember when Mary comes in and she anoints His head and anoints His feet. All of them are like, wait a minute. She's not supposed to be doing that. Why is He letting this woman touch Him? And the Pharisees, how come your disciples don't wash their hands ceremonially before they eat? You talk about a myopic focus, and Jesus is like, it's not. I didn't come for that. I came for them. This is what I'm here to focus on. And over and over and over again, you see Him reaching out to people that everybody else thought, no. He literally was there to go to people that were genuinely hurting. So what do we do? I'm going to give you a couple of quick things, because the disciples looked through a microscope. They were like, ooh, look at this one little tiny thing right here. And Jesus is like, I got the telescope and I'm looking at the end. I'm looking so far away, down through the corners of time. I see the people that I love down through time. I know the number of hairs that are on their head. And even when I get older and I lose hair and it turns gray, He still knows how many are there through the telescope. And Jesus is calling us to look through the telescope and not the microscope. And this is a great opportunity for us to do that. So What do we do? How do we help out in a time like this? Well, the first thing, if you notice what Jesus and them did, I'm going to give you a couple of quick steps and then we'll be done. The first thing is to recognize. Obviously, immediately they recognized there was a need, didn't they? I was like, hey, these people have a problem. Now, of course, when the disciples came to Jesus, they didn't really care about solving it. They were like, okay, enough's enough, let's go, send them away. But first of all, you actually have to recognize and be moved with compassion and recognize that there's a need. If you're not gripped by something, that means something outside yourself, that means you may be focused too much on the inside. If you can't listen to what's going on with someone else, then you may be too focused on what's going on with you. And we all have our moments when we do that. When tragedy strikes, that's all we can see. And I think it's not only a defense mechanism, but it's a coping mechanism. But generally, we have to be able to recognize and to be kind of gripped. The second thing that they did, you realize, they analyzed right away. Of course, the disciples are analyzing why it won't work. Is that true? Oh, it's not going to work. We can't do this. We can't do it because of this, and this, and this, and this, and this. So there's recognize, and then there's analyze. What do you got? What do you actually have? And that's what Jesus said. What do we have? Well, we got 5 loaves and 2 fish. But, Jesus, what is this among so many? So there's that recognize, and then there's that analyze that we have to do. And then the next thing he did was he organized. See, sometimes, and you see that happening, by the way, out in Houston right now, there's a lot of haphazard stuff happening. You know, I don't know whether you have seen the Post, and I'm going to, at the end here in just a moment, share with you some of the things that they need out there. But they're saying, please don't send clothes. Have you seen some of the stuff that people have been sending out there? This is great. People have been sending winter clothes. Now, if anybody's been to Houston, it's hot. Humidity is like 99%. They're sending teddy bears. They're like, oh, well, maybe the people in Houston are going, stop. And I know you go, but, I'm just trying to share what I don't know. Find out what they need and then organize around it, and then let's try to focus on that. That's why we've said, no clothing. If you bring clothing, it's going back home with you. Because we got people that just dump stuff here all the time anyway. They dump it by my back door. They dump it here. It's just like, and there's some of the times we can't do anything. I can't even read to you another one that I saw this morning of the stuff that people are giving, and it's like almost disgusting. But what does Jesus do? He organizes, says, okay, we're going to put you over here, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. God never meant us as a church to be disorganized about stuff. He never meant, well, it's haphazardly, just go do this, go do that, and don't think about it. He organized. He had to tell the disciples because they weren't thinking, I want you to go and I want you to do all that. And then the next thing that sometimes we miss out on is exercise. Start to act. See, it's one thing to be gripped, but being moved with compassion means that I actually move. It doesn't mean that I go, oh man, that's horrible. Let me flip over to CNN now. Oh my gosh, that's horrible. Let me go over to MSNBC now. Oh my gosh, I can't believe that. Let me go back to the Weather Channel. Oh, that's horrible. I can't. We got to do something. God wants us to do what we can with what we have. And I don't know what that means for you. And by the way, it's not just meanwhile in Houston. Because there's meanwhile in Dania Beach, meanwhile in Davie, meanwhile in Fort Lauderdale. There are vulnerable, victimized people all around us. We have to not just do this during a crisis, because there's people outside here that are already in crisis that are saying, help. And we can't be so focused on what's happening in here that we're not able to look at what's going on out there. You know, one of the things I think is so extraordinarily important, that when a church focuses on how are we going to reach people out there, if the first question is, well, we're not reaching the people in here, then we already have a problem. Because when you reach more people out there, what happens is you get more people who are gifted, you get more people who have been reached, and they come in, and all of the inside stuff begins to take care of itself. But when we say, what are we going to do for me? What are we going to do with this? What are we going to do with that? What? My question is, what are we going to do out there? How are we going to reach the people that are out there? The people whose marriages are breaking up, the people's kids who've got on drugs, the people who have lost loved ones. Folks, when I come on this campus and I think about, how many how many people we have, and you can figure about our preschool and then figure our kids and our parents and all the different needs. Nobody has any idea, because most times when people walk in, they're looking at the microscope at what's going on with them right now. There are so many things happening just right here, right now. It's extraordinary. It's extraordinary what people are facing. And that's why God has called each one of us to tune in and to listen and to be responsible and not to be tone deaf and to do what we can with what we have. Let's pray.